I soon stumbled across a strange and fantastical family adventure about a mysterious stranger trying to stop some sort of ugly, parasitic, supremacist beast that wanted to take over the world. First it would overpower its unwitting victims, and then, as if they were nothing more than meaningless marionettes to be manipulated and thrown away, this parasite, this abomination, would use them to advance its own megalomaniac schemes. And then, once it had squeezed every ounce of dignity from its victim, it transformed into a hysterical, high-pitched, flaming trash can, intent on the total extermination of man. The poor mysterious stranger never stood a chance. And it struck me that this tale seemed somehow strangely so all far too familiar, and a warning of a possible future to come. A warning on the first day of the last year of the most woke decade that's ever been. And sure enough, within days, American psychologists were quite literally pathologizing traditional masculine traits. Men's rights activists were being compared to Nazis, and their murders were being portrayed by Netflix as a fixture for family fun. And of course, the manufacturers of certain manly products woke us from our slumber just to tell us how toxic they think we really are. I could go on because some idiots still just don't see the problem, or think it's just some sort of honourable critique of certain behaviours that no man should support. But thankfully, when the chips are down, the clock is ticking, and I stop to consider the copious, complicated conundrums this stunning and brave new world constantly seems to create, I always ask myself in any given situation, what would Carol Vorderman do?
Men. This is a critique of certain types of behaviors that men indulge in that no man should want to support. What is wrong with teaching our young men to be sensitive, to be thoughtful, to be courteous, to be considerate of other people?
I'm sorry, I have to interject here because you're implying that all men who came before weren't all of those things.
Well, I'm not saying that all men. I'm saying that some men.
Wrong. So
I made that clear. Some men.
Males who perhaps are now World War II veterans or so on, who were not only brave, courageous, all sorts of different things, but who are also charming, polite.
Right.
Carol,
Carol, when you saw that ad, what did you think?
I hated it.
Right.
I really did. I found it insulting. I found it offensive. And I'm not offended by anything, but I was offended.
Because when the Countdown Queen stands in solidarity and speaks up for us, you know we're on the right path. And besides, when Elizabeth gave me the impossible mission of summing up an entire year of gender politics in under 20 minutes, frankly, I could do with the extra help. And so, gentlemen and ladies of this great conference, please fill your glasses to the half-full setting, assume the position, and feel free to cheer along as we now commence Carol's countdown celebration of some reasons to be cheerful in 2019. And what better place to start than the New Year's honours list? And the OBE awarded in recognition of all the good work undertaken by Mark Brooks and everyone at the Mankind Initiative. Standing on the steps of a powerful woman's palace, Mark acknowledged the fact that 10 years ago it would have been inconceivable that such an honour would have been awarded to such an unfashionable cause, and that it sends a strong message that the public, the police, politicians and support service providers are slowly but surely moving towards a far more inclusive and 21st century view of the ungendered realities of domestic violence. Next, let's give it up for none other than today's keynote speaker and the most important publication of the year. As others at this conference will attest to, his book is undoubtedly the most significant, comprehensive and serious publication about gender bar none, a tour de force and a mountain of rigorous, dependable, authoritative sources, all written by a man whose work has done so much to demolish the wicked myths, pernicious fictions and poisonous superstitions of modern feminist creeds. All of which brings me to J4MB's eventful trip to Cambridge and a lesson about how ignorant and detached from reality girly SWAT academics sometimes really can be. Over 500 of them were so horrified by the very thought of two upstarts daring to disrupt their strictly one-sided debate about equality in the 21st century that they signed up in support of false allegations concerning violence and abuse, And then when that didn't work, cheered on as their students concerned themselves with actual acts of actual violence and abuse.
Universities should be arenas wherein students build resilience, tolerance and dignity, but increasingly activists are subverting these spaces to feed anxiety, black and white thinking and hysteria within their communities. And this is harmful to the search for truth that they should be engaged in, and also harmful to the individuals they claim to want to protect, including themselves. Feels like a competition.
Their Vice-Chancellor may very well claim that freedom of thought and expression and freedom from discrimination are still very much a thing, but when esteemed fellows and human rights barristers are seen to publicly cheer on assaults on campus, something is clearly rotting out the heart of university life. Happily and hilariously, you will all hopefully be aware that a hero was on hand to ensure that some sort of justice was ultimately served.
Did you throw milkshake on my friend?
Let me go.
What's your name?
She won't let me go.
Did you throw milkshake on my friend?
Break it up,
Did you throw milkshake on my
Break it
friend?
up.
Thank you, sir. Did you throw milkshake on my friend?
Break it up.
I know you're stronger than me, mate. She just assaulted us. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call the police. Call the police for me, please. Call the police for me. Call the police.
The old Bill's lack of urgency over that particular matter is testament to a fundamental problem that many men experience when it comes to the matter of asserting equal rights. Because as many of you watching may well have personally experienced, equal rights are sometimes simply words on paper when the law of the land can simply be ignored, or applied differently depending on what's between your legs. Which is why I thought it was significant to see our national broadcaster taking the time to discuss the law of the land when it comes to assaulting minors.
Where is the law right now in Britain on circumcision, on male cutting?
The law says any interference on a person's body without their consent is an assault. The law says that parents can only consent to surgical operations that are in the best interests of the child. And yet in practice, thousands and thousands of children, of male infants, are being circumcised. It's not surprising that more and more people think that that is anomalous and frankly unacceptable. So in our society, we've somehow got it the wrong way round on this issue. In most issues, we give children more rights. But in this case, we reverse it. We give the young child, who is more vulnerable, less rights than everybody gives to the adult, and that just doesn't make sense. To take any other example in our society, the best example is, for example, tattooing. You don't know when the child's a baby whether they're going to like tattoos or not tattoos, and so as a result, the law says very clearly, and there's an act of parliament to say so, that it is illegal to tattoo minors, whether they want it to be tattooed or not. What I find bizarre is that we allow a much more substantial interference with a person's body, namely the cutting of their genitals for no therapeutic reason, without the issue of the child's consent even being a problem.
Every year, babies around the world lose their whole penis, and there are deaths in the European Union, small numbers, but there are deaths every year from non-therapeutic circumcisions.
Where do you think the state should sit on this? Should they ban circumcision or make sure it's delayed or...
Well, again, I'm not an ethicist, but I find it difficult to understand why female genital mutilation is a criminal offence, but there's been no decision on male infant circumcision. But as a non-religious person, I don't see the difference between the two. Neither has significant health benefits in the UK. Both have loss of sensitivity, in my view, and both are unnecessary.
Clearly, equal rights existing on paper don't mean they come even close to being equally applied, but the first step to addressing the most blatant inequality is at least pointing out that it so clearly exists. Which is why I think that some of the jaw-dropping levels of bigotry we currently witness can actually help in the long run.
Men like to talk a good game, but they don't realise that equality isn't just about pushing someone forward, it's also about pushing some people back.
Yes.
Take a step backwards.
Yeah.
Take my nomination for Bigot of the Year, whose commitment to the cause of female supremacy was even a bit much for a fellow feminist and card-carrying member of the Women's Equality Party.
The cabinet that you describe, first of all, to get into it,
you have to have a vagina, and secondly, you have to believe in another referendum.
This is just for a very short time. It's about getting, the 10 women in the room, they might indeed decide that actually it would be fantastic to have Dominic Grieve in a key position in cabinet, and maybe that would happen. All I'm saying is let's get the 10 women in the room to see if we can get a different dynamic, some broader thinking, some new energy into this.
Do you believe in gender segregation?
I believe that sometimes if you've got a group of women coming together, they can come up with some fresh thinking. I don't think there's anything remarkable about that.
Do you
We've had 2,000
men and women
years.
should be segregated, for instance, at university?
No, of course no, Emma, come on.
Exactly. So that's the flaw here, isn't it? Which is that you are a liberal, you're rational, you can understand why people who may have sympathy for what you're saying would feel grossly confused and, dare I say it, offended by your proposal.
I think most people would recognise that this is an emergency. In an emergency, we need some creative thinking. That what I'm suggesting is for a short number of...
In an emergency, if you had a man and you were listening to him on the radio today and he said, in an emergency, we need to get the blokes together, just the chaps, what would you say?
Emma, they've been doing that for the last 2,000 years. I'm suggesting that a group of women might get together for a few weeks to see if we can break a logjam that currently is causing our country to speed across to a precipice of no. I'm simply saying that the group of 10 women would have some fresh thinking. They may decide that a final cabinet would be have all sorts of different people in it. Great if they do. But at the moment, I'm simply saying that by reaching out to these women and other parties, we might get a different dynamic.
Fortunately, not all politicians are so averse to equality, and some are even increasingly speaking up for men. This year, prominent men's rights spokesperson Martin Daubney was elected as an MEP and has just announced that he will be standing for our sovereign parliament. If Martin follows the example set by Neil McAvoy in the Welsh Assembly, then we could be in for interesting times.
There is a hidden form of domestic abuse which is permitted in society, and it is that of parental alienation. Many men who come into my office are suffering from emotional abuse and coercive control. Children are used as weapons and everybody loses. In South Wales, the police refuse to accept such abuse as abuse, and that's a scandal. I'm going to read a quote from a man in a lot of pain, a father, and he said, quite simply, severing a relationship between a parent and child is, short of taking somebody's life, the worst thing one human being can do to another. The culture of false allegations, sometimes to get legal aid in the family court arena, is also a killer. Men are criticised for not engaging and not talking about how they feel. But when you are in the family court system, you cannot talk about any suicidal feelings, any emotional turmoil, because that will be used against you to prevent you from seeing your children. And I look forward to the day when criminal justice is dealt with by Wales in a completely different way, especially in the family arena.
And of course, how can I talk about politicians without mentioning the Right Honourable Philip Davis, whose address at ICMI 19 was a definite highlight for me. Not only because it was a robust middle finger to the bigots and bullies who came after him for quoting Home Office statistics about crime, but because he was able to offer some practical solutions for a problem so long overlooked.
In Britain, we currently have a domestic abuse bill going through Parliament. I'm going to try to table an amendment to this bill when it comes before the House of Commons to amend the definition of domestic abuse. I want the definition of domestic abuse to include cases where one parent deliberately denies the other parent contact for no good reason at all. As far as I'm concerned, this is just as abusive as some of the other listed abuse, causing significant distress, upset and harm. In some cases, the harm is so bad it can tragically lead to suicide. Anyone in Parliament who allows this recognised situation to continue without trying to do something about it should be ashamed of themselves. I also want to table a further amendment to include false allegations of domestic abuse as domestic abuse in its own right. And we in this House have a duty to treat everybody equally before the law. And I hope that it doesn't matter whether the perpetrator's a man or a woman, they should face the full rigour of the law, and whether the victim's a man or a woman, they should have exactly the same safeguards by this House. And I hope that that's what this legislation will do, and I don't want to hear any ideas that it shouldn't be like that.
Of course, one of the obvious reasons why men are still treated like second-class citizens in this area is that so many of our current lawmakers entirely disagree with that last statement.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? He needs to accept the facts that women are more affected by domestic violence than any other group.
Including the chair of Parliament's Committee for Equality, who clearly needs to accept the fact that lesbians are more affected by domestic violence than any other actual group. I might also learn a thing or two from the UK Statistics Authority, who provided other highlights when they recently supported a complaint by the Men and Boys Coalition against none other than the Parliamentary Undersecretary for Safeguarding Vulnerability for the misleading use of overwhelming majority to refer to female victims of abuse. Happily, there really are far too many highlights to cram into such a short amount of time, and I'm sorry if I've missed any that are particularly important to you. This year also saw the biggest and best received international conference on men's issues so far. Another successful year for the Male Psychology Network. Philip Tanzer gave BBC Radio 4 listeners an inspiring introduction to the men's rights movement. Patrick Graham produced a powerful documentary about the crushing impact of false allegations. And this year has seen plenty of important work and activism undertaken by many people, including many in this room. Not least from your two brilliant MCs, Natty and Elizabeth, who in March took the debate directly to feminism's front door. But I want to finish close to where I started, with a sign that speaking out really can lead to change. Or at the very least what appears to be a massive U-turn, judging by Gillette's latest message for men.
Be your best. Follow your own path. Feel no pressure from him, or her, or them. And start by taking pressure off your skin. So whatever pressures you face, shaving shouldn't be one of them. Gillette, the best a man can get.
So what do you think? Maybe, just maybe, they've listened and learned a valuable lesson about how it pays to treat your customer with just a little bit of respect? And if they really have, then I guess that's a bit of a conundrum for those of us who vowed to boycott their products forever and a day. So what do you think, chaps? Is it time to be the bigger man? Is it time to forgive and forget? At the end of the day, I guess that's a personal matter for each of us to decide. But ask yourself the question, what would Carol Vorderman do?
F U C K G I L L E T T E
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.